Hello and welcome to this review of my NMB 113308-001. This one is from the second generation of NMB Hi-Tek keyboards, of which I've previously reviewed the first one, third one, and fourth one, so this is a nice completion of the NMB timeline. It was a donation from a viewer, thanks again mate, and it's in swell condition too, which is pretty significant considering the switches it comes with, but I'll get to that in a bit. In terms of looks, it looks very much like a hybrid between a first and a third generation board, and although it resembles many other AT keyboards of the time, which tended to have a very similar styling, it has one particularly unique feature that immediately gives it away as being an NMB product. See, many keyboards have one or two keycaps that have one of these stepped edges like this. It's most common on the caps lock key where it prevents accidental triggering, and it's a good feature that all keyboards should have. NMB, however, had some bizarre brain twist that made them step a whole bunch of keys, and uniquely on the outside rather than on the inside. This feature carried over to the third generation as well, and it's a dead giveaway that a keyboard is an NMB, and these models are always mechanical as well to my knowledge. I still have no clue what the idea behind it was though, as I doubt it was done for stability reasons. Speaking of which, old NMBs actually used really nice keycaps made out of thick PBT with high quality dye sublimed printing. They're quite low profile and they help with the characteristic extremely deep sound of NMB keyboards. Even their space bars, which on this one is a positively mastodontic 9.75 units long, were often made out of PBT, which most manufacturers didn't dare do, because PBT shrinks a lot compared to ABS, so a key as large as a space bar is one to come out wrong. NMB and IBM were two of very few manufacturers that made PBT space bars. Most others just used ABS instead. Quite impressive for a company whose keyboards were very competitively priced at the time. The keyboard features OK build quality, the shell is thick plastic and the switches are mounted in a thick steel mounting plate which adds to its near exact 1.4 kilo weight, which is pretty heavy. It has a bunch of plastic clips at the back that help reinforce the case however, which can come off, as most have in this case, which have made this particular one a bit more floppy than usual. And while we're at the back, here is the model sticker showing the part number of the keyboard, as well as that it was made in Thailand, like almost every NMB keyboard ever made, as well as a serial sticker number that shows a date stamp of 1986, although it's actually from 1987 as shown by a later date stamp in the keyboard. Just like with the third generation of NMBs, it comes with flip-out feet that sit completely flush with the back panel of the case when not extended, and they even have the same texture on the back, which is pretty elegant. The cable is a massive piece of work, 5.5mm thick, and coiled too, so it stretches nicely if you need the extra length. It comes with the old 5-pin DIN plug and uses the AT protocol, so it's really easy to convert to USB with either an AT converter such as this SAW as I use, or a combination of an AT adapter and a PS2 converter. When the keyboard arrived, the block retaining the cable had come out, which is a bit of a pain in the arse to put back in place, but now that it's there, it's all fine and dandy. As you'll probably guessed from the intro, or just read in the title, it uses Hi-Tek NMB Series 725 switches, which are colloquially known as Space Invaders due to the bizarre shape of the slider, which resembles the eponymous cute little 8-bit monsters from outer space. In this case, it's their earliest type, the one-eyed linear variant, which is the prevalent switch type on the first two generation of NMB keyboards. The tactile and clicky versions were introduced with the third generation, although there was some back production it seems. Well, I say oldest, but technically there's an even older type of Space Invaders, which are present only on the very earliest first gen models. But those have a slider that looks quite different from any of the others. Those are generally known as the Gundam switch for their resemblance to robots or something from a Japanese animated cartoon series. Maybe I'll cover those at some point in a future review as well. Anyway, these Space Invader switches are somewhat stiff for linears. In fact, all Space Invaders are on the heavy side, but they're smooth and nice to use as long as they're clean. They're not as easily offended or twitchy as Alps switches are, but still, I'd recommend getting NMB keyboards only when they're clean. Thankfully this one is clean, and this allows me to revisit these switches properly, as the Hi-Tek 725, which is a first generation XT model I reviewed previously, was originally in very poor condition and the switches felt like crap, so I had to lube them a bit, which somewhat skews the results. Because this AT model was much cleaner, lubrication was not necessary, so I can reflect better on the switches. Actuation occurs rather high up, and the travel is not quite 100% linear, which helps with the monotony a bit. I really like these actually. If they came in a weighting just a little bit lighter, these would have scored very high on my list. Linear Space Invaders have a fairly good reputation, and I would definitely agree with it. Excellent typing sound as well, very deep and full. In fact, it's easily one of the bassiest switches I know, probably as a result of the thick, low-slung keycaps and enormous, ridiculously overstabilized sliders. I'll compare it to a G80 with Cherry Amex Black real quick for you. Here's what they sound like. When you lube these Space Invaders, like I did on my Hi-Tek 725, you end up with an even more distinctive sound. I found this to be highly reminiscent of blocks of wood hitting blocks of wood, and many people have mentioned they really like this sound, but that said, I think I actually prefer the sound of the AT keyboard. Even the spacebar sounds deep. You know how most spacebars sound hollow and rattly? Well, not this one, listen to this. That must be the most thundering spacebar I've ever heard in my life. From the depths it came. As always, they stiffen the spacebar up, so I often swap the spacebar spring with a lighter standard one, such as that of the pause key. Overall, they're excellent switches, some of my fastest typing ones actually. The lock keys use a different switch with a purple slider and a housing that allows an integrated LED below to poke out. These LEDs shine through little green windows in the keycaps. It's a cool little thing that a lot of keyboards had back in those days. I think it's much more useful than a bank of lock lights like you get on most modern keyboards. One problem with these though is that the LED isn't very bright and the window doesn't let all that much through either, so it's kinda hard to see if it's on or not. For example, at the moment both of these look pretty much the same, but actually the left one is on and the right one is off. Here, let me show you. Overall, this is actually a really nice keyboard. The AT layout it uses is not the absolute best. It's missing F11 and F12, and it has no numpad enter, or nav cluster for that matter, and it has a tiny backspace key, although some of you will like the control that's stuck in the caps lock space. The switches are great though, the build quality isn't bad, and the keycaps are outstanding. Considering for how little NMB keyboards went back in the day, I can see how they managed to get a good market share, as NMB were one of the biggest manufacturers back then. It even has N-key rollover, hot damn! That's it for this review, thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and following is a typing demonstration of me typing on this keyboard.